Welcome back to the Noise Podcast. Live from Queens, New York, we are here for the Week 9 episode of the show. This season, we're pulling back the curtain on the grind of betting an entire NFL season. With an analytical approach, real-time reactions, and an honest look at the highs and lows, each episode gives you a seat at the table as the NFL season unfolds. Whether you're betting alongside us or just here for the sweat, welcome back to the Noise.
Analytics don't work. Smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics.
The analytics don't mean anything in football. Take those numbers and you can make them say whatever you want.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean? The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
All right, guys, we are jumping right into it. We'll do a little bit of a recap of Week 8. Then get into our survivor thoughts, and then kind of start to talk about Week 9 and what we're doing with the market so far. So, good week for us in Week 8. We had a couple of nice wins come through. We had the under in that Dolphins and Falcons game that somehow stayed under after the Dolphins put up 34 points. We had the Jets plus 6.5, which ended up cashing. Jets money line cashes as well. Couple good outcomes for us there. The Titans and the Colts over, right? We talked about that on the podcast and in the Discord where it opened at 45, and we really couldn't believe the number. Got all the way out to 47.5, 48. We kind of said any number's good. Keep betting that game, and obviously all numbers cash. So good week overall for us. A little bit of a survivor disaster for a lot of people, right? If you use the Atlanta Falcons, like many of us did, the Dolphins just beat them. The Dolphins beat them down. There's not a single moment in the game where it looked like the Falcons were going to come back. Obviously, Drake London being a bit of a surprise inactive was a little bit shocking to some people. So that was tough to overcome. But man, Kirk Cousins just he doesn't look good. We kind of were thinking that if there was going to be ever a chance for Kirk Cousins to have some sort of semblance of being an NFL quarterback again, have any kind of comeback, it'll be against this Miami defense. And, we kind of thought, all right, let's lean on Bijan Robinson, right? Play out of the play action, try to let Kirk get some easy throws against a soft coverage unit, and none of that really happened. They didn't really use Bijan a whole lot. In the beginning, it seemed like they were prioritizing trying to get Kirk to throw the ball, maybe to get him comfortable. I'm not so sure, but by the time you get near halftime, right, you're down 17 points. So really never entered a game state where they could lean on the run, and ended up getting burned by Miami, who really. I wouldn't run this to upgrade Miami at all. I think we got into a very strange game state, and the Falcons' poor roster construction and poor management kind of rears its ugly head again. And when you think about Michael Penix not being the best quarterback out there, or really kind of being close to league average, if not a little bit worse, the play style difference is so stark to him and Kirk Cousins. So it's really difficult to design an offense that's going to work for both of them. You're going to have to implement a whole new game plan. And Kirk Cousins really struggled. So I think that's it for him. We're leaning towards Penix and London coming back in for Week 9, but unsure of that status at this current moment. We also had that Bengals game, which we mentioned, betting the Jets. I did not play any Bengals in Survivor, mostly because I did feel like the Jets had, some probability to win this game, and I don't really want to lay points with the worst defense in the NFL. And from a Survivor's perspective, there was other options to use, but a bunch of entries got burned, not as many as the Atlanta outcome naturally, but in a lot of pools, about half the remaining pool, I should say, went down, if not, between 40 and 50%. So if you've made it this far, if you're still alive in Week 9, congratulations. I still have a handful of entries left, so we will continue to talk about Survivor and kind of look ahead to Week 9 at this moment. So looking across the schedule, right, you have a couple big favorites this week. I mean, just reading them off, right? Even starting with Thursday Night Football, the Ravens were 7.5-point favorites. Detroit 8.5, Green Bay 13.5, the Chargers 9.5, as well as the Rams 14.5-point favorites hosting the Saints. So a lot of options for you to choose from. We'll kind of look at this one by one a little bit, starting with the Rams, right? We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we did use the Rams again. A lot of people use them already. If you still have them, you have a little bit of inherent leverage just because people have used them or they're out. That being said, right, if you look in your pool, a lot of pools have the ability to check, what's the percentage of people that have used the team or what percentage have this team available, right? If you can see that the Rams are pretty widely available, I don't think this is the time to use them. I think perhaps week 13 when they're playing the Panthers, that might be a better look. Not that they're not going to win this game. I have full expectation that they're going to blow out the Tyler Shaw-led Saints. The Saints moving to switch over from Spencer Rattler, who you just is not showing it at this point, not showing that he's going to be a starting quarterback. And I agree with the move for the Saints. I think you're going to be bad. You got to see what you got in this kid Shaw. In the preseason, he was very up and down, right? A lot of turnover-worthy plays, but they were able to get some measured success with the offense because of his aggressiveness. So we'll see how he fares against a real NFL defense, especially one fresh coming off the bye like the Rams. So I think the Rams are a great choice if you have them in general, but as far as the game theory of it, I'd like to wait on them. I think what will be the biggest spot is going to be the Chargers. I think everybody is really jumping to go against Tennessee. You have a lot of people who are on that I bet against Tennessee every week, and it's deserved. A lot of people are on that train right now. Chargers to me are the shakiest just because I don't view them as strong as a team as, say, the Rams or the Packers, but I think the Chargers are going to be quite popular this week. And then that leaves us with the Packers, who, again, should be fairly popular given that they're playing the Panthers, and a lot of people, maybe are on this fade Panthers train, especially right after getting blown out by Buffalo, right? Some people, on Twitter and out there were heavy on Carolina just because that Baltimore number was pretty big on the road. Personally, we didn't play it, but a lot of people were interested in Carolina, and they kind of fell flat. Now going on the road, even though Bryce Young should be back, they're well deserved to be huge underdogs in this one, and I think you're starting to see Green Bay kind of get it rolling. That second half against Pittsburgh last week looked a lot better for Green Bay, and that's the kind of that's the kind of football they're going to need to replicate going forward. So I'm gonna say Green Bay is a good option here, right? I think the Lions, and we'll get into that Lions game a little bit more in detail towards the end of the show, but again, thinking about future equity when you're going to use these teams later on, I think you have plenty of use case to use the Rams later. You have use case to use the Packers later. But the Chargers, I think, is going to be a spot where everybody goes. So you want to try to balance that, future equity with current leverage against the pool. So that's going to lead me to using the Packers mostly in this one. I think, depending on how many entries you have left, maybe you can sprinkle a little bit of the Lions, but and one of my main entries that I'm working with, I use the Lions already actually, so it's going to be a Packer spot for me, and we'll kind of pick this back up next week when maybe there's not so many options. Quick look at the futures market. I played the Cleveland Browns under 5.5 wins. Going through this schedule for the Browns, I'm having a really hard time trying to find 4 more wins. There are a few games where there's a possibility that they won't be underdogs, but I'm expecting them to be underdogs almost the whole way through, with the exception of Week 14. They'll host Tennessee. They'll probably be favored there. But you have Week 10 at the Jets. You have Week 12 at the Raiders, and then Week 16 at Cincy, and potentially Joe Burrow could be back if Cincy decides to let him play. I'm in the camp that if Cincy's out of the playoff run, you've seen the last of Joe Burrow for 2025, but we'll see what what Cincinnati ends up doing later in the year. That being said, right, these are my spots where I think they have a semblance of a chance to win, and they would need to win all of those games in order to get over this 5.5 win total. I don't think that they should be implied favorited to do so, right? It's about -120 to -125 in market for that over 5.5. And I'm really just not seeing it. I think they're going to be underdogs in a lot of these spots. We know that their defense is world class. We know that the pass rush with Myles Garrett can break a game at any point. But Dylan Gabriel simply doesn't have it. Shedeur Sanders isn't even healthy enough to be on the roster at this point. I wonder if they try to give him a look at some point in time, but as of right now, it's the Dylan Gabriel check down show. And again, what we've seen with the Browns in years past is you really can't blame this defense for quitting. Right, there was a clip of Myles Garrett really frustrated on the sideline, slamming his helmet down after getting 5 sacks in a game, and it basically meaning nothing against the Patriots team that essentially blew them out. So I'm really ready to sell on this Browns team. Not that anyone's really buying them with a win total of 5.5, but I think this is going to get much uglier than it is right now. These away games, the defense is already has a tendency not to play as well. And I really wouldn't be surprised as we get towards the dog days of the season that this Cleveland team defensively really just stops showing up. And without that, they're going to be in a world of trouble against anybody. Again, with that game-breaking defense, if they're all engaged, if they're all healthy, they have the ability to wreck any game, right? And they have some difficult matchups on the schedule, but they're playing Baltimore. They're playing the Bills. They're playing them both at home, which would be spots for, the defense to kind of get heavily involved. I just think that where they are relative to where those two teams are, you are going to be just asking for a huge uphill battle for them to win those games. And based on where they are in the schedule, right, you can easily play off of this 5.5, right, where I think if they lose to the Jets, especially, and they lose, some of these implied games, by the time they get to that Bills game, they'll be they'll be like 9-point underdogs at home. And if you really want to buy out of this under 5.5 position, just bet them on the money line in that game. It's almost going to be necessary for them to win that in order to cash in over on that bet. So under 5.5 at plus 105, you can find that at FanDuel, plus 100 across the board. Otherwise, those are good as well. All right, so we'll move on to talk about some of the picks that I have specifically for Week 9. And the way that we're going to do this week, which I think we're going to start doing going forward, is we're going to take a look at the Discord for some suggested games. We asked everybody in the Discord, to highlight some games they want me to talk about, want me to go through, and some of them are going to highlight a few of the bets I already have in. So we'll jump right in it. I'm just going to take a quick look at what's at the top of the list. We got the Chicago Bears and Cincinnati Bengals. This is a really good place to start for us. And as is common with the podcast, right? I want to talk a little bit about the theory, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the words we use and the phrases that are getting thrown around on gambling Twitter and stuff. I'm talking about being a sharp, right? So when you're betting in a week, right, when the lines originally come out on Sunday night or Monday, right, those lines are often pretty different than what you end up seeing on Sunday, which is what you would refer to as the closing line. And again, this is a perfect time to kind of plug the Discord again. I do most of my NFL betting very early in the week. I'm trying to take advantage of bad openers. I'm trying to take advantage of some kind of hesitation in the marketplace. And the only place that you can get all of my picks in real time is the Discord. Click the link in the description or in my bio. Join our free Discord today. So as relates to the Chicago and Cincy game, right? We bet over 51.5 on Monday morning when it first came out. This quickly shot out to 52, 53 on Tuesday. Now we have a little bit of quarterback controversy. Before we talk about that, right, I just want to close off this thought on being a sharp bettor, right? So what the concept of being a sharp is to sharpen the line, where when you have something open up at 51.5, let's say it closed at 53, right? It closes at 53 based on the action that the sports books receive from sports bettors and market movers that they respect. So when they create liability on a side, or they have a liability in the sense that people that they know beat them move their market, right, or bet against them, right, they move those markets so that they get a better line and they have another opportunity for some other money to come in on the other side. And that's part of their risk management strategy. It'd be really cool for us to kind of talk into casino / sportsbook risk management a little bit. Maybe I'll try to schedule that into a later episode. But as far as this is concerned, right, being a sharp doesn't mean, winning your 8-leg parlay that you placed on Sunday morning of, touchdown scores. That's not what a sharp is, right? Again, a sharp is somebody that is sharpening lines by betting into softer markets and creating that more efficient line that you get towards the end of the week, which is why I always advocate for early week betting, betting based off the moves that we make in the Discord and trying to get ahead of the market. So as it relates to Chicago and Cincinnati, right, one of the issues that we have with betting early is kind of more news coming out about this Joe Flacco injury. And this is something that we have to balance when we're doing this, right? When we're betting on Sunday night based on what happened on Sunday afternoon and what happened in the coaches meeting or what happened in the coaches press conference, or the player press conference. So we didn't feel that Joe Flacco's availability was going to be in question, even though he did get banged up in that Jets game. It didn't come out until Tuesday or Wednesday that he was actually 50-50 to play. And the drop-off between Joe Flacco and Jake Browning is, potentially a significant one, given how bad Jake Browning has been. So when we're looking at this game, right, initially we feel great about that over 51.5 because it shoots up to 53. We're going to get some CLV there. But now it's back down to that 50.5 range. There's still some dichotomy in the market where, you have a 52.5 out there. You have, some books kind of all over the place because there's some volatility when you have a 50-50 shot, right? So how are we going to play this, right? Let's talk about that. If you are trying to play this a little bit more conservatively and honestly, perhaps like a more professional opinion when you're talking about the risk management and like deploying your capital, you might try to buy out of this position, right? But for guys like us or, guys like me where, yes, I'm taking, decently large bets on stuff where I can get the action down, but I'm not betting, I'm not a professional bettor, right? So I'm going to let this position ride. I'm going to wait for the upside. If Joe Flacco ends up playing, then I think we have a great position at 51.5. And I think if Jake Browning plays, I don't think our position is all that bad. I think the game is still going to close in that 50.5 range. We'll get a little bit of negative CLV, but I wouldn't be so against rebetting it and rebetting it just with the Chicago Bears team total. I think the Cincy defense we know is the 32nd ranked defense in the league. They lost Trey Hendrickson again. Not that he was really impactful in that Jets game, but he's certainly going to be out again, meaning they have no semblance of pass rush. They have no run defense. Their coverage is horrific. So Ben Johnson and the Bears should be able to carve them up any which way possible. Now you have the option of, when Joe Flacco's in, maybe you get a game state where it's a little bit more of a shootout and they kind of shoot this game over. That's when I would consider some of those alternates that we look at, right? Maybe taking this game over 55.5, right? Where Joe Flacco's pushing the ball down the field. We know that Ben Johnson shouldn't really have an issue getting the Bears to score. So we could end up in a game where this is a shootout and actually ends up, being a 30-27 type of game. But if we have Jake Browning in, where we don't trust the Bengals offense to move the ball as easily as they do with Flacco, you have the opportunity for defensive scores, which how bad this guy's played. Short fields based on turnovers, right? He's had fumble issues. He's obviously thrown multiple interceptions in all of his starts. So you have a ton of opportunity for the Bears to put up points. Maybe you don't trust the Bengals to follow suit, but I'm going to essentially double down on this should Jake Browning start and play a Chicago Bears team total over, probably in that 26.5 to 27.5 range. I think those are both going to be fine. And if Flacco does end up playing, we'll consider looking at some alternates. But again, if you want to know exactly what I play, make sure you join the Discord. So next game that we were asked about in the Discord is the Indianapolis Colts and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this is a really interesting one because this was referred to as a trap game. And I kind of want to use this as an opportunity to talk through what a trap game actually means and if it exists. So Firstly, just to tee up the game, right? You have Indianapolis at 7-1 going into Pittsburgh, an AFC matchup. Game opens up in that 49.5 range and really gets bet up all week, up towards 51. You got a little bit of buyback at 51. Some games, some markets in the 50.5 range. Initial opens looked like they were at 2.5. They quickly got bet up. You have, at this point in the market, some really heavily juiced -3s. I think a couple of sportsbooks have flirted with a 3.5 for Pittsburgh, but those were quickly bet up. So this game was referred to as a trap game at 3.5. I guess first, like before getting into that, we should define, right, what a trap game is. Like a trap game is very subjective. What you believe to be a trap is the whole concept of the trap and why it enters this really interesting space for us between, the actual, right, being the probabilities that are derived from predictive modeling or market making, right, versus the kind of groupthink ideologies that you get about certain games and certain spots where you create this concept that something should happen or something looks fishy. And then when the fact that let's say this 3.5 for Pittsburgh looks fishy to you, that creates the concept of a trap. So I think what's implied by our good member here in the Discord is that, at 3.5, the sports books, or sometimes referred to as Vegas, right, remember, Vegas does not make lines for the most part. A lot of the stuff is made offshore. Vegas mostly copies lines. You don't have a lot of operators out there that that create their own. But the sports books in this case, right, they are inviting you to take 3.5 with Pittsburgh because it feels like, they're inviting you to lay 3 or 3.5 with the Colts because it feels like somebody's going to cover. So the reason why you get a game, the reason why you get a thought like that is because you have a short favorite in this case where, based on how Indy's played and based on how Pittsburgh's played, you might have expected Indy to be a wider favorite because the public perception of Indy is so high, right? They're 7-1. Jonathan Taylor is going to flirt with an MVP because of how much he's being used in the run game. Daniel Jones, we bet on him comeback player of the year. He has opportunity to kind of have the best season of his life. Shane Steichen is your likely coach of the year as well. So with public perception being so high on the Colts and the Steelers kind of having the opposite where the defense has not been as good as expected. The defense, although it ranks sort of average in DVOA and also EPA per play, it's a little bit below average. They're expected to be a top unit, right? When you have a pass rush that has T.J. Watt and Highsmith, you're expected that defense to be much, much stronger, and they've honestly kind of been a letdown. But this is why it's important to take a look at market ratings, right? Where if you use a site, and I cite them all the time, use a site like Unpredictable. They can just tell you what are the market ratings of the teams. The market ratings of the teams, these are derived from how the markets have been pricing the teams up to this point in the season. So the Colts right now we're seeing as a +4, and the Steelers right now we're seeing as a -0.2. So this implies that on a neutral, right, the Colts should be about 4.2 points better than the Pittsburgh Steelers. This game is naturally in Pittsburgh, where, perhaps you have a little bit of home field advantage. Remember, the line for home field advantage nowadays is 1.7. That is the average home field advantage that we're using right now for the NFL. And a lot of teams, that number could be much less based on, what kind of fan base they have or what kind of environment they play in or what kind of geographical advantage they have. So the Steelers, I would say, are kind of in that range. They don't really have a geographical advantage. Sometimes they get a weather advantage because Pittsburgh tends to get very cold. It snows there. It gets windy. You don't have any of those issues this week. It should be relatively calm across the league in terms of the weather. Honestly, we should probably double check that really quick. Last weather report I looked at looked pretty clean. So just double checking. I like to use roto grinders for the weather. Kevin Roth is a pretty good analyst, so possible rain in that game, but nothing really crazy in terms of the wind. Wind is one of the more important factors you have to worry about when it comes to the NFL, but it looks like it's going to be in the 50s and a slight chance of rain. I don't really treat that as an issue for this one. So when you're looking at it, right, when you get the Colts as -3, you're basically implying that the market's pretty close. We're pretty close on where we quote unquote should be based on the ratings of these teams. So it's kind of hard to say that there's a trap here. We're looking at this one from the lens of somebody that's saying that the Colts are a trap spot, where laying 3 or laying 3.5 with the Colts is the trap, because they shouldn't be a short favorite against a team like the Steelers. But as we're looking at this, right, it's pretty close, right? Based on this rating, on if you're giving Pittsburgh, let's say, a full 1.5 points, right, you land right on 2.7. So if we're saying that at the Steelers, Pittsburgh should be, at the Steelers, the Colts should be a 2.7 point favorite just based on market ratings, right? Without getting into any updated injuries or updated matchups or tendencies or anything like that, right? We're just saying based on pure market rating, Indy should be -2.7 points at Pittsburgh. And we're getting -3, pretty juiced in market, which is actually implying that there is Pittsburgh money coming in and fighting against that 3.5, which disappears every time it comes up, or even against that juice 3. So there's Pittsburgh support in the market, and that is based on the ratings that we have for these teams. So I want to try to get back to this theory, right, of what is a trap game and why does this phenomenon happen? It's because you have this thought process, right, where Indy should be more favorited against Pittsburgh. So we should all bet Indy because we think they should be better than Pittsburgh, because 3 is maybe an easy number to cover. 3 is too short against Pittsburgh. But in reality, the correct side, right, in this example is Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh is more than likely to win this game because for whatever reason, right, Indy being 7-1, they're one of the best teams. This looks like a game they may drop, right? We don't often see teams go 8-1. We don't often see teams that are exceeding expectations continue to exceed expectations through the whole season. There's usually an inflection point. So for whatever reason, if you think that might be now, right, that is a data point that you would use to argue whether or not you should bet this side. And that's what people are doing in the market, right? When you understand that this game should be about 2.7 and you get it to 3.5, 3 being a key number, the market's immediately betting Pittsburgh. There's no trap there. The trap is all perceived, right? Because whether or not Pittsburgh covers this game, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the outcome of an individual game is. You have to think of sports betting as first a marketplace on trying to get the right price together for this, and then think about it as if you ran this simulation 10,000 times, what's most likely to happen? Because not only do you have the line, right, but you also have not only do you have the spread, you have the line, which is the implied probability of that. So when you have a juiced number for the Colts at -115 or let's say -120, right, your implied probability is even higher. Now you're not just saying, right, when you have -3, -110, you're implying that it's 52.5% that they're going to cover 3. But in this case, it's actually even higher than that, right? Let's say it's closer to 57. You're saying there's a 57% chance that they cover 3. The other bettors in the marketplace are not agreeing with you. And the sharps who are betting against Indy and keeping this number within 3 are the people that are following the market ratings. Now, it's important to just remember that none of this means that Pittsburgh is going to win, or none of this means that Indy is going to cover. It just means that there's money on both sides of this market that are going against each other and trying to find what's the best position for them based on how they either rate or model the game. So it's not really a trap for anybody. The trap is only perceived by the person who feels like it's a trap. And again, this is why it's the most important thing for you to remember as a sports bettor. Your greatest advantage against the sports book is you don't have to bet. If you view this as a trap game, and maybe a better way to phrase that going forward is you view this as a game where you don't agree with, or you think the market is where it should be, or you're not sure where the market is on this, don't bet it. If you don't know if Indy should be a 3 or a 4 or a 5 in this game, don't bet it. And if you think that Indy should be a 5 and it's absolutely Indy is 5 points better than Pittsburgh, the market is wrong, that's okay. That's your stance. That's your opinion. Bet Indy. If you end up losing that game, think about why you thought that. Don't think about how Vegas or, the lizards in Europe that create the lines, don't think about how they trapped you or forced you to do anything. No, you be one with your opinion. If you think that Indy should be 5, bet Indy. If you think that Pittsburgh should be favorited, bet Pittsburgh. Take the points, take the money line. But you got to learn to live with the stances and opinions that you take. And remember, if you don't want to take one, then don't. Leave the game alone. And all that being said, that's exactly what I'm doing. I do not have a bet in this one. I think we're going to look, at some props later in the week when we kind of understand what we think Indy's going to do just by looking at it, right? Pittsburgh has had a really big issue with explosive plays all year. Their defense has been, has let up a bunch of big yards after carry plays that have led them to be, really vulnerable. And that's one of the things that Indy does best. So maybe I'll look at some longest reception or, longest rush for Jonathan Taylor. We'll look at where those numbers land relative to normal. I think at the time of recording, you don't really have the full prop menu yet. That's why it's tough to give out props on this show sometimes. But again, join the Discord and check back in with us throughout the week. We'll try to get some action in on this game because of the potential volatility that we have. We might be able to get some large numbers in there. All right, next game I'm going to do before I head into our Sweet Gains Frozen Lock, which I can't seem to win one of those to save my life, but we're having a good season overall. Just these Frozen Locks that I'm choosing are kind of just not going through, so maybe we got to start fading that. But we're looking at the Denver Broncos and Houston Texans. So I'm a little surprised that this number is still where it is, and I do expect that there's going to be some movement here. So you initially coming in, I think the look aheads had this at like Denver -1, and after the game on Sunday or after Week 8 ended, you reopened at Texans -1.5. Nico Collins should be back. You should get Christian Kirk, but I'm not exactly sure if you will. But not that he might really matter at all. I think you have some nice receivers in Higgins and Noel that can take his spot. But Nico Collins certainly matters. It's a vertical threat that the team is kind of lacking. When he's on the floor, sorry, we're into basketball season now. But when he's on the field, the offense is much more efficient and really helps C.J. Stroud. That being said, the Houston Texans offensive line is Swiss cheese. It is really, it's been the thorn in Stroud's back almost his entire career that he takes a ton of sacks because he doesn't have any protection, and he turns the ball over when he has to roll out and kind of get stressed in these pass rush situations. And as we have continued to see with the Denver Broncos, this is one of the best pass rushes, in recent memory, not just this season. So they are absolutely killing it. I know Pat Surtain is probably going to miss this game, but having a full week to prepare to kind of see what they're going to do against the Texans, Pat Surtain does make a difference, but I really wouldn't let that take you off of a Denver position. So yes, the Texans offense is finally starting to look a little bit better. Yes, we are, I'm happy for CJ Stroud that he's actually, able to move the ball down the field at certain points. I still do think this defense is world class. I think they're really good. And I don't think Bo Nix is that good, quarterback for the Broncos. That being said, I think that this is a mismatch for both these teams. I don't think that the Broncos offense is going to be hurt as much as the Texans offense will be against their defense. That's not to say that the Texans don't have a great defense. They have great coverage as well. But what they really do well isn't going to affect the Broncos that much because they're so content to play in the short game. They're so content to run the ball and get chunk yardage that way. And they do have the weapons that they're able to stretch the field if they need to. The issue is just Bo Nix kind of has struggled with some of those deep passes throughout the 2025 season. So if Bo Nix can continue to play like he has played in recent memory, right? Let's say the last 2-3 weeks since that Charger game, probably, I think the Broncos offense will be okay. With an applied total of 39.5, right? I'm not saying that they're going to blow out the Texans, but I think the offense is going to be okay just because of how it's designed. On the other side, the Texans offense, they are not able to handle the pressure that the Broncos are going to be able to put on the ball. I think this game is going to end up flipping, and we've talked about it on the podcast before. Going from -1 to +1 for a team is not a big deal, right? If Denver ends up flipping to -1 and you feel like you missed the line, you can still bet it. It's not a huge deal, but anything Broncos even money, I'm inclined to bet right now. It's not a huge position for me, right? I still think there's a lot of worlds where Bo Nix doesn't play well, but I'm definitely playing some Denver Broncos in this one. All right, and we'll finish this podcast off with our Sweet Gains Frozen Lock for Week 9. Brought to you by Sweet Gains. Sweet Gains is a protein ice cream company providing a high-protein, low-calorie option to help you with your fitness goals. Without further ado, my Frozen Lock this week is the Lions, -8.5. Big number. We're asking for a lot to cover that one, right? A lot of backdoor potential here, but initial market move was up. People bet that 8.5, right? It got up to 9.5, maybe a little bit of pushback at 10, but I didn't see a ton of 10s in market. But 9.5 was pretty readily available earlier in the week. I'm really surprised to see it staying at 8.5 right now. Naturally, it's a great teaser leg if you can find it at a place where teasers aren't priced more than -120. Lions 8.5 is a great thing to pair with, let's say the Ravens or something. But where I'm looking at right here is the Lions coming off the bye. They're getting a lot of their defensive players back. Brian Branch should be healthy, should be ready to go. And they're going up against a Vikings offensive line that looks terrible. I mean, they're extremely thin. We talked about how the Texans are thin. They're going to be extremely thin as well. And J.J. McCarthy's coming back. Carson Wentz going down with an injury. J.J. McCarthy, we haven't really seen anything out of. I know that everybody in Minnesota seems to believe that this kid has the answer. Kevin O'Connell is one of the coaches that I trust in this league and one of the guys that I expect to design a pretty decent offense and really use the skill set of the player that he has and hide his weaknesses. I think Kevin O'Connell does a very good job with that, but this is a tall task. I think the Lions' defensive front has been much better than advertised. They have rushed the passer at a rate that was better than expected, right? With Aiden Hutchinson coming back off injury, we were kind of concerned he was the only guy out there, but they've been able to hide some of their issues that we expected at cornerback. The coverage has been okay overall, and the pass rush has really been getting home. So I think that this is going to be an issue for Minnesota. Minnesota's biggest strength, right, is their defense with Brian Flores. The best thing they do is have all these disguised blitzes that they're able to get pressure on the quarterback using unique packages and stuff. Jared Goff has naturally played this defense multiple times a year and has proved to be okay, but quietly, Jared Goff, within the confines of the Lions offense, is one of, if not the best quarterback against the blitz. He is a positive 0.58 EPA per dropback against the blitz in 2025, which leads the league. A little bit surprised because I'm not the biggest Jared Goff guy overall on the talent, but his ability to command the Lions offense and utilize all their super athletic and extremely good pieces that they have he does that at a very high level. And I think he'll continue to do so. Coming off the bye, they should be well rested. I think this ends up being a Lions blowout. J.J. McCarthy, to me, is not ready. I'm not sure if he will be good. I think he has some of the physical tools that you might look for, but I haven't really seen it from him as far as processing and, getting the ball out quickly at the NFL level. We'll give the kid a chance, but I don't think it's going to be this week. I'm playing Lions -8.5 as my frozen lock, and I will be looking at some alternates as well. Also, maybe looking live depending on the game state. So I buried the headline a little bit, right? We also have the game of the week, which is the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. I know a lot of people are going to be betting on that game, watching that game. I wish they were flexing games at this point in the season, right, where you ended up getting Seattle and Washington in Sunday Night Football instead of this game. I'm not sure exactly why the schedule makers allowed that to happen, but I wish they were flexing games and that could be moved into Sunday Night Football. But for now, we'll get it as Fox's game at 4:25 Eastern Time. I mean, it's the matchup of the year, right? It's the matchup that we look forward to when we get it in the playoffs. It's generally two of, if not the two, best teams in the AFC. I know the Ravens have something to say about that, but really, really great matchup for us. I've talked about my concerns with the Buffalo Bills on this show, especially defensively. I think they still are not the best at stopping the run. Ed Oliver's out for the year. They do get Matt Milano back, but overall, the linebackers and safeties, they're pretty thin, and I think they have a hard time over the middle, and I think they have a hard time stopping the run. So the pass rush does tend to get there a little bit, and maybe some of those Carolina numbers are skewing this, but I think the Buffalo Bills defense generally takes a little while throughout the season to mature. I mean, Matt Milano ends up playing like 2 or 3 games a year anyway, so I'm not surprised that Buffalo is concerning me at this point in the year, but they are. So I'm not ready to upgrade them yet until we kind of see them round into form. And on the other side, the Chiefs offense is at its peak at this point, right? I know Isaiah Pacheco might end up missing this game, but between Kareem Hunt and Rashard Smith, I think they'll be just fine. And what's the real strength is the pass game. And in my opinion, if you have a good scheme and offensive line, if you have a great pass game, you will have no problem running the ball because they're going to need to defend all your weapons that you have on the outside or in the slot. So I think the Chiefs kind of get whatever they want over the middle. It's really going to come down to, can the Bills pressure Pat Mahomes? And this is another great example of, this could easily be a shootout. And this is the last point I want to leave you guys with, is talking about game states. So the reason why I'm not making a pick on this, or whether it be on the side or the total, is I'd like to see what type of game state we enter before doing so. And that will allow us to have a really effective live betting strategy, because you're looking for specific things within a game to know kind of what you're doing, right? If this is a shootout, right, if both offenses are moving the ball very, very well and very quickly, this game has the potential to get into the 60s, right? And if they continue to do so throughout the game, you can really start to pick up some live overs in that case. And even if it's a number that's worse than the pregame number, when you see them just mowing down the defense and getting down the field, that's the kind of game state we're in. If we look at the Chiefs from how they like to operate their offense, they like to use the run to kind of control the clock. As both of these teams do, right? With James Cook on the Bills, they have the ability to do this as well. Playing slow, or at least using the clock efficiently on offense, is the best way to play defense against an elite offense. When you're going up against Josh Allen and the Bills, your best chance at winning is not letting Josh Allen have the ball all that often. So I think that the Chiefs could kind of get into that game state where they're able to control the clock, control the game, and control the time of possession, which helps them build and maintain a lead. So I'd like to see what type of game we get into before we start running at, the Chiefs are going to win, the Bills are going to lose, or whatever. I guess I'm tipping my hand a little bit there, where I do lean Chiefs, but the reason I'm not betting it is I think the number is a little too rich, right? I don't think we should be at -2 for the Chiefs on the road. Again, looking at unpredictable numbers, you have the Chiefs right now at 7.8 and the Bills at 4.5, meaning the Chiefs should be 3-point favorites on a neutral. But I do rate the Bills Orchard Park as a decent home field advantage. So even if you gave them a full 2, right, you make this KC -1 on the road. I can't quite get to -2, and that's just using unpredictable, which I think might be overvaluing the Chiefs a little bit and perhaps undervaluing Buffalo. And again, that's just market rating. That's just what we've seen so far. Nobody's really basing their bets solely off of this. It's just a good way to kind of make sure you're close to market. So long story short, I think the Chiefs are the side. I do think that the Chiefs will win this game, but from a market perspective, I don't think there's any advantage to be had in laying 2 points with the Chiefs. Wait for it live. Get in the Discord. We'll make some bets. We'll have some props in this game for sure, just because I think it's going to be a pretty big Travis Kelce game. So we'll see where those numbers come out, and we'll take a look. We'll take a look at that live in the Discord. That is going to do it for the Week 9 episode of the Noise Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you're listening to this in podcast form on the podcast platform of your choice, whether it be Apple or Spotify, thank you as well. Please remember to like and rate the podcast. Lastly, I've said it a few times, but remember, the Discord is the only place to get all of my bets in real time. Make sure you jump in the Discord. The link is in the description of any platform you're listening on, also in my bio on Instagram. That's going to do it for this week's episode of the Noise Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Good luck and Godspeed.